Hello, I am Sharindria Robinson.
Marcus Robinson.
And welcome to another episode of Faith, Family, and Finance. It's a windy Sunday evening where we are, and so we come on with the giggle because we want to make sure that this is not going to be take one, take two, take three. So
A tragedy, basically.
it seems like we have a stable connection, and we just want to welcome you. Welcome you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So come on. And we have a very interesting conversation tonight. But as always, the conversation is nothing without you. So I ask that you engage in the dialogue, and we'll try to keep it moving for the next 50 minutes or so. Because I'm sleepy. I'm very tired. Those of you who are watching, okay, let me go ahead and say this now. There are so many of you who are watching, but you're watching on a different platform. You are watching us on Marcus's Facebook page or some. What do you do? What are those things you
What a
do?
watch party.
Marcus starts a watch party, and you're watching there. Come here. Come to Robinson Coach's Facebook page. So let's meet here because you guys have some very interesting conversations going on, and we try to pull them all in. But we continue to share on the various media platforms. I guess we need to stop doing that so that we can get people to come here. But thank you again for coming in. As you come in, we just ask that you let us know where you are watching from, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Let's do it.
All right, sounds good. Our topic, make sure you say hello to us. Our topic tonight is the black church's role in advancing wealth. Okay? Our role in advancing wealth. And so, since Marcus is the wealth guru, I'm going to ask the questions tonight. And we're going to let him expound also with your comments. So we definitely want you to engage. But we see so much is going on right now in our world. And I even hate saying stuff like that because it's like everybody knows it, but we just keep saying so much is going on, and we're living in such unprecedented times as if everyone doesn't know that. But you see the states of our economy, and post COVID-19, it's just going to be a very different landscape, very different landscape. And I feel like, hey Cottrell, thank you for joining. Hey JoJo, he said he's in Augusta this time. He's usually watching us from Texas.
That's
but
closer.
Yeah, a whole lot closer. He could have come in and been on the show. You saw how I just leaned over and got all the way out the frame, and you didn't tell me. Okay, all right, okay. So when we were when we get to this post COVID-19 era, post COVID-19, the landscape is going to look very different. I mean, it's already different, but it's going to be very different. And my fear is that if the black church has not been doing anything before COVID-19 to help bring about wealth and prosperity in in their community, however they define the word community, among their parishioners, what is it going to look like post COVID-19? Um, you and I are very adamant about making sure we teach um, biblical strategies, financial strategies. Even when we can't do it in the sanctuary, we do it on this platform every week as much as we possibly can. Tell me, uh, what are some things that the church can do, the church should be doing to advance wealth? If that's even something that the church should be doing. I mean, is that really the church's role to try to help people get to a better financial base? Or should that just be something that your family does?
Well, if we're talking about the black church, which we are, the first thing we need to do is reinvest in our communities. So, for instance, it could be something as simple as teaching home ownership, right? So, for instance, in every community of color, there are dilapidated homes. They call them blighted areas now, but they're dilapidated homes. Churches can buy those homes, fix those homes up, create a sense of pride, and sell them to their church members.
Okay, Marcus just said a whole
homeless.
lot. Hey Sam, howdy y'all. See, I have to look down
Sam.
because I need to see who's coming in. Cottrell says true, but if your leaders aren't knowledgeable about building wealth, how are they going to lead? And I was going right down that street. I get it. So let's just go there because that's actually where I was going. Not even just with the financial piece, but when it comes to real estate. So if you have leadership in the church, you're quite knowledgeable. We know some of the pastors who are realtors, my brother actually being one in Augusta, who understand this whole mindset or phenomenon of possessing the land, and that's what God is calling us to do. But for the pastors who are not knowledgeable, and I don't believe they have to be, but the leaders who are not knowledgeable, how do they make that happen? How does the church still facilitate in that process?
Well, part of good leadership has to do with knowing where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, every pastor is not equipped to be an investor, to be a realtor, to empower people to build wealth. However, you do have a platform. So your job as a pastor, as a leader, at that point, if you don't have the information, you are to create an environment where people can get the information. You know what I mean?
So it's about just having that mindset.
It's about that mindset. Because the reality is, if you look at, and this is a point of, this is a lot of what we kind of overlook sometimes, but our school systems are basically funded by our tax base. Mm-hmm. So when you have very, very good neighborhoods, quote unquote, with high house values, you tend to have better schools. Mm-hmm. If you have houses that are valued lower, you tend to have schools that need money, that have problems, that have issues we tend to talk about. So everything is about this tax base. And, the reality is it's time out for the church getting into a bunch of social issues. And we need to really focus on what's going to move us forward. And what's going to move us forward are those things that we can look at generationally.
Okay. So I don't have to be the owner of all of the information, as long as I know where to get the information and bringing people in to facilitate the congregation conversation with the congregation.
Right. I didn't necessarily know how to produce video until I had to.
Well,
as a leader, it's your job to figure it out. Mm-hmm. It's your job to surround yourself by people who know how to do what you can't do. Mm-hmm. And so we have to, as parishioners, hold our leaders accountable for what they don't know. Mm-hmm. That's the reality. And sometimes, that can be a pressurized situation because, the typical excuse for not moving forward is that we don't want to look like the world. Mm-hmm. That's typical. However, God has called us to lead, and the world should be following us, not the other way around. So it is what it is.
So as a pastor, I would say if someone came to me and said, "Hey, pastor, you really should be teaching. We should be teaching home ownership classes, and we need to be buying up the houses in our community." And I wasn't married to you; I was married to somebody else. I don't. And somebody come to me, and they were telling me that. The first thing I would say was, "Oh, that sounds great. Do you want to facilitate that project?" Because I would not want you to bring it to me unless you also were bringing me a solution to help facilitate the project. Mm-hmm. So now you're like, okay, yes, I can do that. I'll help. I'll do whatever. And I think sometimes we run into this. And so you take the ball and you run with it. And then something happens. Somebody, they get a bad deal. Somebody in the church tries to buy something, or somebody feels like somebody's trying to take advantage of them. Don't we just muddy the water when we do business? And I believe in doing business with the people in our church. But when you're the pastor and you're promoting certain things, and then you let people come in and they do whatever. I know a lot of pastors are very, forgive me for this word, but I'll just say territorial. So they feel like a lot of pastors are very territorial. So they feel like, okay, I'm going to let somebody come in, to do whatever with my sheep. But then if something happens, they feel like now I got to go and clean up the mess that somebody else made, whether it's trying to teach them about stocks or bonds or home ownership, or, what if they come in and try to get them into a different type of businesses that the pastor don't approve of. Just talk about that a little bit, because, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reality is what you have two issues in what you just said.
I got it.
The first one has to do with trust.
Okay.
Our community has trust issues.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, I think Jesse Jackson said it best: when America catches a cold, Black America catches the flu. And so, for so long, because we've had so little, we hold on for dear life to what we have, and so we don't have a lot of room for error in our community, and so that's been to our detriment. The reality is, anything that you do has risk. Any and everything. Getting up and going to your job, you just don't know. It's a risk. Your boss might be plotting to replace you. Your boss might be trying to figure out how to downsize, how to do your job more efficiently without you.
Or you might not make it.
Or you might not make it. So it's a risk in everything that you do. So I think that what has to happen is we have to be honest and say, look, home ownership is important for the following reasons. These are the things that you have to do to maintain home ownership. If you don't do them, this is what happens. Okay? Sometimes we don't lay it out that clearly because it sounds really, really black and white. Mm-hmm. It is. Mm-hmm. But that's what we have to do. And we have to figure out how we can demystify and kind of figure out how we can move past some of this distrust between the pulpit and the pews. Mm-hmm. Because the only time you will have people doing stuff like that is when there's distrust between the pulpit and the pews. And it doesn't exist in every community.
So the churches should buy, if there's real estate in my neighborhood, on the street, wherever, my church, and I know that there are people in my congregation who may want to be homeowners, but for whatever reason they can't. And I know this is just one way. I'm sure Marcus has many more, but they can't become homeowners. You're suggesting the church bring someone in if they don't have the knowledge in house. We teach and talk to our people about home ownership. That's one of the things that we could do to establish wealth, but we could take it by teaching them, but we could take it to another level by purchasing houses and making those available to members of our congregation.
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Right now, I read an article recently in the Washington Post that talked about 60% of money that's collected right now is going into church staffing, meaning the pastor, the musicians, whoever it takes to run the actual organization. Mm-hmm. Okay? That does not include mortgages. Mm-hmm. So if you add another 25 to 30% with mortgages, that doesn't leave a whole lot for community building. Mm-hmm. Doesn't leave a whole lot for community development. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things our community is suffering right now, because our money is allocated in places where it does not grow our community.
I got it. I'm with you.
So we ask people to tithe, but we don't tithe as a church to the communities that the people come from.
And Montez said something about that earlier. Like, if the church can people to give, then the church should
reciprocate.
Exactly. The church should do that. So you mentioned one thing and that we can do, and that is great, home ownership, and everybody. I'm not gonna go there. What's something else that the church can do?
I see. How has this become an interview with me?
Don't y'all love it? I love it too. Come on. What is something else that the church, the black church, the way you put it, what's something else that the black church can do? Since you're saying that the black church should play a role in helping to facilitate and bring about wealth in its community. So what is something else that the church can do?
We have to redefine community. So, for instance, community can be looked at one of two ways, one of three ways, but one of two ways. Okay. Basically, you can say, okay, if my church is located on 123 Main Street, then we're responsible for the people on 123 Main Street in the surrounding areas, right? However, if you're a black church and 123 Main Street has no other African American entities in that radius, that's not your community. You just live there. You're just housed there. So our community is where our people are. So our people may be in a totally different zip code. What I'm suggesting is we look at the zip code where we have the highest concentration of people that look like us, people who have our issues systemically, and people who hurt like us. Okay? So we have to redefine community, because reality is, in order to get this tax base up, in order to make our communities not only safer but better educated as far as our school systems, we've got to put money in communities that look like us. Right now, we don't do that. We don't do a good job of that.
Y'all listen to Marcus. Let me see what y'all typing, because I don't always agree with everything that Marcus Robinson is saying. So he's gonna need some of y'all to agree with him right now. So let me say this.
Y'all can call
or
me.
you don't have to.
Too.
You don't have to agree with him. Let's say this. We're living in this season right now. I want to go to where you're saying about community. In this season right now, just like people who are watching us online, this is our community. Yeah. Like, this is the community.
Okay.
So now, as a pastor, are you saying that if I have I don't want to say a totally, but if I have a different demographic online than I had when we were in the building, now does this online community, am I responsible now for helping to facilitate the wealth, the growth, the prosperity of the people who are watching online?
I'm saying,
is that my community? Because some of these people on here, they come back. They're faithful. They come every week that we're doing this. Let's just say this is church.
Okay, this is church.
Am I responsible? We did with Bishop Marcus Robinson. You responsible for facilitating the wealth of the people who show up?
Okay, so the way I would answer that is we're responsible for several communities. At the end of the day, you have to find communities that have the highest concentration of people that look like you, and respond like you. We have to be intentional about figuring out who we're gonna target. So, for instance, we as African Americans, we're not in a position to say we're gonna help everybody. Mm-hmm. We're not. First of all, we're a minority in numbers, minority in just about everything else that means something. So it's one of those things. We're not in a position to say we're going to help everybody. But what we can do is help ourselves get in a better position and then extend our help to other communities. Mm-hmm. Right now, we have to reach in first. I wish I had better news, but that's where we are.
And Cottrell asked, how can church buy houses? And Javertis has kind of answered that. So if you read down, you will see the answer that he has posted. And we were also a part of a church that owns several houses. So we've been a part of ministry where churches buy houses and rent the houses to whether it's people in their congregation or just people in the community. How we define the community. But yes, so it is. It is very possible for churches to buy and to own multiple houses, and it's very common. When we take at least some of the inner city churches, one church we know of in New York, they have not just houses, but an entire apartment community. They have senior housing, they have low income housing. They partner with the government. There's that word we didn't want to use, but they partner with the government, and they receive grants. They get HUD grants, and they do all types of housing and renovation. So it's, we've seen many churches do that. My thing is, and I wanted to say this for later. Okay, no, it's too early to bring it up. I'll bring it up later. I'll bring it up later. Y'all don't let me forget. I said I'm bringing it up later. I might forget what I'm going to bring up later.
Better remind her, because I have no clue as to what she's talking about.
Yeah, okay, so let's just go there then. As we're talking about the church and the church's role in helping people build wealth, and we've listed out some of the things that the church can do, definitely education, home ownership, I think financial literacy as a whole. I know you mentioned education just about the housing piece, but I think financial literacy as a whole, whether you're talking to me about just basic savings, debt, stocks, bonds, insurance, I think the Black church plays a big role, or has a responsibility to make sure that the people are educated. But we have to make sure that we're educated. And our church, we had some very good leadership, and our church was very good at bringing somebody in. And I've said this, if you've watched us on these podcasts before, I've said that, we had a financial advisor that came into our church when we were in our 20s. And before anybody thought about pastoring, came into the church when we were in our 20s. and talked about investing and all these things, and just kind of, met with me and was like, ma'am, you need to clear that first. Like, you can't even do that. But my pastor, even though he was knowledgeable, he didn't have to have all that information. He just brought somebody else in who have the information. We just have to be willing to facilitate the conversation. And a lot of times we're not willing to do that.
Yeah, you're right. Jojo makes an interesting point. He says, look, so would the churches try to make money off the homes, or just enough to break even and build a community? I think there's room for both. I mean, the reality is the church is providing a necessary service. You would, in a home ownership deal, you're going to pay somebody. So you're going to pay a realtor, you're going to pay an organization, you're going to pay somebody. So the whole idea is to keep the money in your community. So it can be a realtor in your community, be a church in your community, but you pay somebody. There's cost involved with home ownership. Or Dr. Samuel Hinton says community involves financial strategy, economic development, spiritual welfare. And hold on, somebody calling. Okay, hold on just a second. I know. Financial, spiritual welfare, social justice, empowerment, diversity, inclusion, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a very broad definition
of community.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hinton. Need you to call in. Thank you, sir.
Yep. And we have Cottrell calling in now to weigh in. What you got?
Oh no, I'm gonna go back to the part where you said JoJo asked about. Okay, it's a lag. But anyway, go back to where JoJo mentions of whether or not the churches should try making money off of the homes.
Yeah.
The banks make money off of selling our homes, off of mortgaging our homes. So what would be the difference to where our churches do the same thing? We buy back our communities and use the money to replenish, purchasing more, as well as rehabbing other ones within our communities.
Sounds like you know something about rehab. Just what it sounds like.
I agree.
Just what it sounds like. And for anyone else who calls in, keep in mind when you call in, turn the volume down on your phone or your device. That way you won't hear that lag and that echo.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cottrell. Appreciate it.
All right. Yeah. Good point. Go ahead. Good point. That's a good point she brought up. We have to look at our mindset and just like, hey, somebody's going to make money off of this. I think Marcus did perfectly in that there's room for both. Like, there's room for the people to get into the house. A lot of times, it's not, our people can afford the homes. A lot of times it's just getting into the home. Right. Most people, don't have that down payment, or most people credit score is not quite where it needs to be. Right. And, it's those types of things. And yes, there are programs that are out there that can help. But if the church is already in the position where they own the home, they can help a whole lot more by, setting up very creative situations to allow that person to get in the home without necessarily all the money down, because the church can participate in some of that. In some of that money, being taken care of. So, we definitely have to, start thinking about this and changing the narrative a little bit, because we have to help our own, and we can't just be in a position to say, hey, come and give to the church, and the church is not giving back to the community.
Right, and the reality is talking about generational wealth. So, home ownership is where it starts. When I was a realtor for another company back in the day, one of the first things I would do when I would sell a home to a person, I would always make sure they understand that my expectation as their realtor was to sell them more than one home.
Got it. Wow.
So because I was an investor before I became a realtor and a broker. So the reality is I understood that home ownership, primary home ownership, is the starting place. That's the place where you get equity in your home. You're able to get lines of credit. You're able to do things, okay? And so we have to, I believe, as you said, and what we keep saying, financial literacy. And I guess we probably need to be a little bit more specific when it comes to financial literacy, because it's in stages, it's different at every age. And the reality is, it's a very broad term. But when we're talking about home ownership, we have to understand that home ownership will lead to us paying for college, as opposed to some student loans in some cases. Because if you think of it this way, if you have a child who has partial scholarships and they need over their 4 or 5 years, they need $20,000 to finish. If you have a home, you can get a home equity line of credit for that $20,000, pay it off, and now every time you pay your mortgage payment, you're putting that equity back in your home as opposed to the student loan company. So this is how these things work together hand in hand. And I believe we have to get to the point where we give more practical strategies, more practical application type things when it comes to not just home ownership, but wealth building and financial literacy.
Got it. So I don't want to get stuck there. So that was good. Thank you for all the commentary.
Yep.
I don't want to get stuck there because it's a broad topic. What can we do to help facilitate the wealth building or creating wealth in our community? And many people I saw today when I went out that there are several people who are already back in their churches. And several more people who are still waiting to go into their buildings, I should say. One of the things that we're doing to go back into our buildings is to making sure that the building has a deep clean. So somebody comes in and they do all this, stuff, and probably working with the same company throughout this COVID season just to make sure that the church is being deep cleaned and sanitized on a frequent basis.
Right.
I came across, somebody actually sent to me a directory of African American owned cleaning companies.
Wow.
In South Carolina throughout the whole state. And so, of course, it was highly encouraged to go to one of those companies. But that was just for this cleaning. What happens if the African American church, as everybody's in this phase of like buying black, if you will, we got all these things out on Facebook, on social media, telling us all the businesses where we should shop, where we should not shop. How important is it that the church does the same thing, make sure that it supports its community, or how powerful could that be if all of us came together and supported?
Well, I think it's crucial. I mean, we have to be intentional, and this is we should never feel that we should never feel bad about supporting our own.
I got it.
Okay, but the reality is we have to be intentional, especially in this season of COVID, because the reality is a lot of people are unemployed. A lot of people have been laid off, and so it's one of those things we have to figure out as a community how we can recalibrate, reset, and determine what's important now. And in determining what's important now, the few black-owned businesses that we have, we've got to support them, because the reality is if they go away, that just puts us deeper in the hole as far as having to always go to another community to get what we call basic.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if there are black grocery stores in your community, you should support them, because the reality is, as a community, if we don't have those stores, we can't even feed ourselves. Yeah. You can't protect yourself. You don't have, gun stores that are owned by us. You can't feed yourself. Basic stuff.
I'm gonna go down this road. So y'all go ahead and attack. I'm ready. I myself up, ready for the attack. A lot of times, it's inconvenient to support our own.
Oh my God, it is.
I said it. You don't think about it like it hasn't become second nature. I did a provided lunch for staff the other day, on Friday. And it wasn't until I had placed the order, and in this season, you got to place the order and pay for it. Wait a minute, you got to pay for it. I had placed the catering order, paid for it, that I thought, and it was hours later, I thought, why didn't I use a black-owned company?
Right.
Now, I used a franchise, and I thought to myself, could they have turned it around that quickly? You know, it's like little things like that. Shouldn't have stopped me, but I thought, could they have turned it around that quickly? This is like less than a 24-hour notice. I don't know if they'll be able to do it. Right. Oh, don't worry about it. I'm not going to call and cancel my order. But we have to practice this more so that it becomes second nature, because right now it's not second because we're not doing it enough. Like I still have to go to the list and like, wait a minute, Facebook said like we need to make sure we shop here today and look at the list to know where to go and what to do. And so when you think about our, you know, communion kits that we buy, almost every church in America, every black church buys a communion kit. I don't know where to buy that from.
Right.
I don't know a black supplier that sells communion kit. I feel like the only thing that we exclusively do as a black church, we exclusively buy black when it comes to the funeral home. Shout out to you, Montez. When it comes to the funeral home, like there's no second thought, there's no second guessing. When it comes to the funeral home, the funeral, we know that that's where we're going black. If we need a new parking lot, if we need a builder, if we need a construction company, if we need whatever, we have to dig and dig and dig to figure out who we can find in our community to provide this service that we need.
You're right. And it is a challenge. I mean, the reality is, I think you said it best, it's very inconvenient. Now, what's interesting enough, we're the only community that has this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say it. But yeah. Funeral homes are like churches. They are very segregated. But this is what I came across the statistics recently, and I want to say this. It says there's okay, phone, don't turn on me. Sorry, y'all. Somebody gonna buy me a new phone. They keep saying it, but it hasn't happened yet. Okay, despite a bleak economic picture, the approximately $300 billion in disposable income in the African American community could be recirculated within the black community to stimulate business and create employment opportunities. So within our community, $300 billion of disposable income is like right here. But we don't really think about it, and it doesn't stay in our community. I think now it stays in our community 6 hours.
Yes.
Our dollar stays in our community 6 hours, and then it's gone. It is gone. Let me just talk about my denomination for a minute. My denomination, AME Church, there in South Carolina. This statistic, let's see. Just in South Carolina, raised $63 million roughly a year. $63 million a year.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. And so that's just one denomination. So if you put together all of our churches, then why don't we have a bank again? Because on Monday morning, even during COVID-19 season, on Monday morning, people are making those deposits.
Absolutely.
Tomorrow.
It could be
somebody from your church, they going to the bank.
It could be a bank. It could be an insurance company. It could be a grocery store. It could be, the things that we need. You can't get away from insurance. You can't get away from funeral homes. You can't get away from banks, grocery stores, churches, drug stores. And all of the businesses, the parabusinesses that feed into those industries. If you think about it, if you have a grocery store, do you know how many partners you have to have in order to have a grocery store? Everything that's sold at a grocery store, that's major. Drug stores, those are major entities in a community. As a matter of fact, you don't have a community if you don't have those things. And so what we have is we have neighborhoods, but we don't have communities. We think we do. But something else you were saying when it comes down to I forgot my thought.
Okay, so Jojo said, and it'll come back to you. A lot of times we can't. You're paying more money. I pay more money at that franchise or the African American owned business than I'm gonna pay at my franchise. For the same meal, for the same opportunity. And you do because not enough of us are shopping there, or like he said, they have a harder time or have to pay more to try to get whatever is in the store.
Yeah.
There's a store that I want to support that and I'm still going to support it. There's a new store that opened and right here in our community, and I'm like, okay, great. I can't wait to go and shop. But I noticed I had just come from, and I'll just say where I came from. Well, it doesn't matter where I just came from another store, another minority-owned store, and I noticed that their product was still cheaper than it is in our product in our store. So let me just be transparent. So if you go to the hair store, hair stores are not, who own the hair stores, right? So if you go to the hair store, because I like making my own body butters and lotions and all this stuff, if I go to the hair store, I can pay $5 for the container of raw shea butter, and then I can use that raw shea butter to make my products. But if I go to the African American owned store, then it's going to cost me $7.50 for that same shea butter that I just bought from the other minority store.
Right.
And because, maybe a lot of them come together and they've got franchise. There's Kim's all over, however, or whatever, store you go to, but they've all come together and they can get the product at a lower price.
That's right.
Because they have multiple stores, whereas I'm referring to like our 1 or 2 stores, so they can't get that same deal. Right. So they have to sell it to us higher.
It's about volume.
It's about volume.
And you would do the same thing.
I know. Yeah.
But again,
it's worth it.
Our community is layered differently. And the reality is we have to make a conscious decision to support.
That's what I was going to say.
Which means sometimes we're inconvenienced and sometimes we do pay more.
That's what I was going to say. So I'll pay the $7.50 over the $5 because I want to support my community.
Right. And we have to be clear. This is our interest that we're talking about. You should vote in your interest. You should spend your money in your own interest. You should always love in your own interest first. Then you lend that out. You never lend out of something that's dry. You always lend out of something that's moving, something that's running. So, for the church folks out there, we talk about overflow. You deal with overflow after you got your own stuff taken care of. I'm looking at an article from Forbes from 2018 that says basically, according to the Institute of Policy Studies, it will take blacks 228 years to close the racial wealth gap.
200 and who?
228 years, according to Forbes 2018 Institute
racial
of Policy Studies.
Wealth gap.
Yes. And this will happen if we don't support our own. Okay? If we support our own, we can defy this. But at the rate we're going, based on these statistics, with our $1.2 trillion in buying power, if we don't support our own, take that $1.2 trillion and support our own, it will take us 228 years to close.
I heard Javerta talk about that. I heard Javerta say something very similar to that recently when we had the Black Wealth Summit, or one of the follow-ups to the Black Wealth Summit, talking about closing the wealth gap, or it could have been when he was doing this segment. But this is, the wealth gap is real, and I don't want to say it's not going anywhere. It needs to go somewhere. Like, we need to close that gap. So, Javerta, if you want to speak on that, definitely let me know. But we definitely need to close the wealth gap. Okay, so we're talking about the black church and the church helping to facilitate and closing the wealth gap. The church helping to bring about wealth in our community, so we can assist with home ownership, we can do financial literacy, we can make sure that as a church that we're using our own vendors, we're using our own to lay the carpet, to fix the roof, to buy our communion supplies. Right. We're using our own. What else can we do?
So the obvious question on the table is, what if we don't have what we need in our community? I believe the church can create what we don't have. Okay. In our community. So, for instance, if we're in a community that does not have a grocery store, and your church or churches in your area, let's say it's 25, 30 churches in your area. Trust me, it's 25 or 30 churches in every area. They can pool their resources together and develop a grocery store and create management within those 25 churches.
I agree.
It can
I
be done.
agree.
And the other thing is, I guess, going back to what you were saying about our dollar bouncing in our community about 6 hours now. In 1921, during the whole Black Wall Street, our dollars actually stayed in our community 1 year. 1 year.
Wow.
Imagine that now.
A year?
1921. Our dollar, if you spend $1 in 1921 in a black community, it will stay in that same community,
In that community, yeah.
for a whole year. Right now, it stays in about 6 hours. Okay, that's where we are from 1921 to 2020.
Something's wrong. So you mentioned something about that closing the wealth gap, and like I said, Javertis, I know he had said something about that earlier. I don't know if it was on at the Black Wealth Summit or on one of the podcasts, but we're talking about Javertis. Marcus threw out a statistic about, and I don't know if you heard it, about trying to close the wealth gap, and if we keep doing what we're doing, it's going to take us, according to this Forbes magazine article, over 200 years, 238 years before we can close the racial wealth gap. And you're going to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, and not just 30 years to close the wealth gap. That's just to get to where white America is today.
Right.
So we're not talking about real progress, right? We're talking about just to get to where they are now. So let's be clear, like, we're not talking about minimizing that gap at all.
No.
But I think from a church, I think we've gone about closing the wealth gap in a horrible way. Like, we've put ourselves in silos. And we've said, well, I'm doing well, so that's enough. And we really have to think about it from a community standpoint, from a corporate standpoint, and we really have to think about it from a generational standpoint. Because a lot of people, just in the line of work that I'm in, I run across so many well-to-do black people who are just like, well, I pulled myself up by my bootstrap. These kids don't have to do it the same way. And nobody... there's not enough intentionality to the next generation. And I think one of the places I put earlier that the church, from a leadership standpoint, it's not enough for the church to just do financial literacy, but I think the church has to have a leadership that are first followers. We need to see examples. Like, that's the thing I love about you and Marcus, and why I believe in the ministry work that you guys do so much, because outside of the church, you guys are putting in work to be the example that the church needs to see. And a lot of times, I don't think that the church as a whole can have the effectiveness that we want to have, because we have leaders who are afraid to be transparent, because when the rubber really meets the road, pastors and the leaders aren't doing what they need to do. So it's like, hey, I don't want to try to have this conversation of building wealth amongst our congregants when I'm afraid that if I pull back the sheet on myself, I'm going to be exposed as a fraud.
Oops. All righty then. Okay.
What happened?
Nothing.
But no, I think that's a big given. I think that's a big problem. And the second problem, I believe, as far as the church is concerned, is, and I share it with our group here in Greenville today in Faith Alive, is that we forget the fact that Jesus' entire ministry was a ministry of justice.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus' entire ministry.
Still is.
And we can't do quote unquote ministry and join in that ministry work with Christ if we're not concerned about the things that concern our community. And wealth, or the lack there is a huge concern in our community. And it was a big concern for Jesus. So much so, like, he goes as far as saying, like, hey, I've come. Like, part of the reason why I'm here.
That's right.
You know, in Matthew 22, he said, I've come to speak the good news to the poor. He starts there. He quotes Isaiah 58. He quotes Isaiah 61. He quotes those scriptures not just because they sound good, but that was the mission statement of Christ. So, okay, I'm sorry. I'm done.
No, I think we just had another caller to That's all. It's fine. You're okay.
I'm sorry.
No, Marcus said you're not sorry. Somebody said, "Wow, Javerta, say it again." No. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. This is good though. No, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for sharing that with us. Hey, niece and nephew, love y'all. I'm a log out, but continue to talk online. Yeah, y'all, that was pretty heavy. That was good though, because it is.
The Ministry of Social Action.
Justice,
social justice,
yes,
and equity.
Yes, equity.
I mean, he
It
came,
was
he
there.
came to level the playing field.
That's right. Okay.
So we have Montez.
Now we have Montez on the line. So we're just gonna start a whole call-in format.
Yeah, I can't type. I can't type and read and talk. So I'm not that good.
That's so funny.
What you got, Montez?
First, giving honor to God, who's the head
Don't see that you.
to the pastor, Pastor Robinson, Deacon Robinson, everybody in their respective places.
Y'all are too much tonight.
I want to piggyback on something that you said, Pastor Robinson. I think a part of the reason why we don't support is because we don't have the necessarily, and it's a truthful statement, but it hurts at the same time.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily trust our community with providing the services that we need. Sometimes we second guess whether we want to use them versus somebody in the outside community because of past experiences of us being burnt by the people that we try to support. I think that sometimes we have to make sure that we not just feel guilty by using our community, but we have to use somebody that's credible and that's going to provide the services that we need. I don't want to second guess whether you're going to be able to provide the meal that I order, or you're going to fix my car the way I want it to be fixed, or just because you're black, I have to use you, and you're not giving me the services that I need. So I think that we have to bring that faith back into the community that we're going to provide the things that we need for the people that hire us.
How do we do that? How do we do that, Montez?
That's right.
It's an integrity thing. I think that I don't have the answer to that, to be honest with you, because from my perspective as a business owner, I try to give the services that I will want to have, but I don't know how we instill that back into the community. I have no answer for that, and I hope that we can come up with the answer, because I think that way we can build the wealth in our community. If the black community have the faith in each other that we're not gonna get screwed over, that I'm not gonna give you my deposit and you're gonna run away with me without doing the service that you were hired to do.
Right. Yeah. I'll speak to that. Thank you,
Thanks,
Montez. Thank you. And I think that's very important. What I think we have to do is to help hold each other accountable. Right. But we don't abandon our own. So we help hold each other accountable. If I used John as my plumber and John did not do what he's supposed to do, it is my responsibility to let John know, hey, you did not do what you said you were going to do. If you referred John to me, I have to let you know, Marcus, John did not do what he was supposed to do.
And it'd be my job to tighten John.
And if John runs off and John take my money and I don't ever see John again, I cannot say I'm not going back to Marcus for another plumber, or I'm not using another black plumber just because John did that. I need to let the community know. I need to let the village know. Y'all, this is what John did to me. If we can help John, let's help John, but this is what John did to me. Can somebody refer me another plumber from the village? Right. But I think what happens is because one person messes us up, we're just like, I'm done. I'm not buying black anymore. I'm not doing that anymore. And we can't do that. We have to hold each other accountable. Yeah. And we have to continue to find other people in our community who can provide that service and provide a quality service at that.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that my dad says, even in our company, when it comes down to employees, and the same would apply to businesses. With employees, we get all kind of stuff. And first thing we ask is, okay, would you do that at BB&T? Would you do that at whatever white establishment or majority establishment? And oftentimes the answer is no. I think there's a lack of, not only a lack of integrity, but a lack of respect for our own businesses. And sometimes, we think that we can say and do and just be any kind of way. Mm-hmm. You walk in, like literally, we running a staffing company that our family runs. We see all types of people. You see people who make $10 an hour. You see people who make $200 an hour, literally in the same day. And so what happens is this, I had to literally make it a law, if you will, in our offices that you can only come in our offices professionally dressed if you work for us. So I don't want to see do-rags and hair bands, and I don't want to see any of that stuff. And I tell our staff, if they come in like that, turn them right around at the door, because they wouldn't go in the bank like that. They wouldn't go in somebody else's establishment like that. So we have to develop our own standards, whether we're on the employee side, the vendor side, it doesn't really matter. I think this is a good time as any to start doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do have to. We do have to do that. We have to educate our own. We have to extend grace to our own. All these things that y'all are saying are amazing tonight. It is not just. I want to say the church does play a role, but it's not just the church's role to help bring about this wealth and advancement in our community. We know that, but all of you who are on this platform, you come on this platform every week, it's our responsibility. I mean, it's everyone's responsibility. If you are attending a church and the church is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, they're not educating, then you have a responsibility to talk to the leadership.
You've just been anointed to do that.
Yeah, you have a responsibility to talk to the leadership, to say, hey, why don't we have these classes? Why don't we have that? But I said I was going to go here, and I actually remember with 8 minutes left.
All right.
So this is the question. As we're talking about, if you're just tuning in, what role does the Black church play in advancing the wealth in our community? Okay. What happens after COVID-19 or during COVID-19 when our churches, when we find small churches, medium churches, large churches, who realize they can't stay afloat? Some churches are going out of business this season. So then what? Like, I'm telling the church to help bring about the wealth of the constituents, the congregants, and the community when the church is about to be in foreclosure. The church can't manage because, what was the number? 30, it's a very small percentage of people are actually paying tithes or giving online. People who live in some rural communities, they don't even have the ability to get, they don't have the internet capability. So there are some people who haven't seen their pastor. Not because their pastor's not doing anything, but they haven't seen their pastor since whenever. There are people who, if they can't drive to the church or mail a check to the church, their money is not getting there. And the church is struggling because they may have huge mortgages for these buildings or just anything, just whatever their expenses are, but they can't maintain. So while we are pushing the church and telling the church, on this platform tonight, let's help our people, then you do have to say, and that's another lie, but who's helping the church?
Yeah.
Everybody's not going to make it.
Well, and you're right. And it's an unfortunate situation. The interesting thing is, if you would talk to anybody, and there are not a lot of people who lived during the Depression that are still around, but I can remember talking to my grandmother who, she was born in 1911, and remembered the Depression and just how faithful they still were able to give, even during the Depression, having nothing. They had gardens, huge gardens, and they had a lot of kids. But the reality is they were able to give even in the Depression. I think our priorities have still changed. I mean, because the reality is, if you think about it, you have millions of Americans who are getting unemployment plus $600 on top of that. So it's not because there's a huge money loss in certain cases, but there is a priority difference.
Fear. People are scared.
So people are storing up money as opposed to giving tithes and offering. And if you can't get to the building, they don't see a need because, you're not there. So what are you doing? If you're providing ministry online, it's cheaper than being in the building. So you shouldn't need as much anyway, right?
Yeah, but you still can't shut the water off at the building. You can't turn the lights off at the building. Yes, the bills are going down, but you can't turn everything off.
Well, and
you
God's
off
mandate has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
And it's a hard pill to swallow if you don't understand and have not been taught biblical kingdom giving, tithes and offering. If you've not been taught that and you've only been told that, then I can understand why it would be a difficult situation, because you may not have seen the fruit of that. So it's a big difference of being taught something and being told something. I'm learning that during this COVID-19 with these 3 little Hebrew boys we got. You can tell them one thing, but if you teach them something, not only do they retain it, they remember it, they can teach you and tell others. And they can't do that if they just get something told to them, which is what's been happening in our church. We've not had true Bible study. You know, I've played for several churches that Bible study really just ends up being another worship service with a lot of singing, a lot of hollering, a lot of hooping, and then we go home after an offering. But there's no real study about what words mean. You know, what context were they written? You know, what were the situations around which these scriptures were done? You know, were said and spoken. We don't get that deep because that's boring. That's not interesting enough. And consequently, everything that's boring, everything that's not interesting are the very things. They like vegetables. Those are the things that you don't really want to do, but you got to do them.
Gotta do it. Gotta do it, y'all. Just like we gotta go. I mean, this has been so good tonight. We had like this whole call-in segment. I loved it. Let's keep it going. Montez says, and I will leave with this, that many churches had to pay, that's true, a lot of money for like this equipment and to be able to provide online services. You know, so many churches were not ready for that. And we're still buying and we're still, paying for stuff. And now that we realize, for some churches, some people are going back. For some, we realize as the numbers are going back up, we may be sheltering in place a little bit longer. So you bought something that was a temporary fix, and now you're like, okay, let me just go ahead and get something for real. For real. And so that's how churches are also deciding to spend some of their money. So if the God has blessed you, then I stand by it. We're blessed to be a blessing. I cannot keep going day by day and knowing that God has put a roof over my head. God has given me food to eat, clothes to wear. I mean, I can't go day in and day out and not give back to God who's given so much to me. That was my stance before I was a pastor. It will be my stance when I'm no longer a pastor. I just can't do it. So I just encourage you, if God's been good to you, then please make sure that you give back in some kind of way. Thank y'all so much. We all play a part.
Absolutely.
In helping to facilitate this wealth. We're all going to get there together. There's room at the top for everybody. So I said, let's go together.
Absolutely. And if there are topics that you want to discuss, we're open to that. I mean, we have a list of topics that we look at. And then there's sometimes where we're searching for topics that we need to discuss, trying to stay relevant, but at the same time trying to make sure that we educate and empower at the same time. So if there are things that we're missing, things that you would like to discuss, things that need to be discussed in our community, we will definitely discuss them.
Yeah, you just have to let us know by like Wednesday, Thursday, and then we can schedule. And also, being a guest on the show, we don't have to always call in. We have the ability, whether we use StreamYard or whether we use Skype, to have some of you to join us as our guests. So we look forward to doing more of that in the future. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening and a great week.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.